Our final item this evening is a report on the public involvement process for the former Milton Country Club. Mr. Carter Lucas.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to turn this over real quick to Mr. Will Herbig, who's here from Kimley Horn, to give us an update on the progress that they've made with the planning for the former Milton Country Club. We've just finished a pretty intensive couple of weeks of public input, and we wanted to come and touch base with you to show you what we've done and what we've heard so far from the committees and the citizens that we've had participate in this process so far, and to give you an opportunity to provide any guidance or input, feedback that you might have on where we are at this particular point in the process. So with that, I will turn it over to Will.
Thank you so much. And I will toggle over to the presentation here. Make sure that that is showing. Let me know when we're ready to go.
There you go.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm delighted to be with you and to have the opportunity to share with you the results of our Phase 1 public engagement for the park at the former Milton Country Club. I come hot off the presses from our open house, which was the conclusion of Phase 1 engagement, which we just held over here at Community Place. So we just got some late-breaking input and reactions to some of our draft policies and design guidance that we'll be giving the design team going forward. I wanted to hit 4 goals with my time with you today, give you a little bit of background, recap where we are on the project and the project overall scope, talk about the engagement process, what we heard through that process, and then how that resulted in some draft policies that will guide the design team going forward. So as a reminder, we have a 2-phase project that's scoped. Beginning 1 that we're in right now is focused on the former country club itself, the former golf course. And that is Phase 1, the park. And we've looked at the site in 2 pieces. That is the passive preserve. That's the fairways, the active golf course. And then companion to that is the active acres. That's the former club facilities, the clubhouse, the pool, the tennis courts. The second phase of the project is focused on trail connections to the Central Milton Trail and a focus on trails within the Fulton County School site off Freemanville Road. We will be looking at that going forward at the conclusion of Phase 1, which is actually now. The project team, in addition to myself at Kimley Horn, we have 3 sub-consultants. Clark Patterson Lee is leading our concept design, the concept for the park itself. Jan Hancock with Hancock Resources as our equestrian expert who was with us through the Phase 1 public engagement. And then we have McFarland Dyer and Associates doing topographic survey work for the trails along the Central Milton Trail. So that's Wood Road, Summit Road, and other mostly made up and composed of the gravel road system between Birmingham Falls down to Providence Park. We'll look at that on a map. So Phase 1, our goal is to identify a vision for the park. That's the 140 acres approximately of the former club. And then Phase 2 is focused on the trails. That is a vision for the trails, both on the Fulton County School site and the Central Milton Trail. So the goal here is Fulton County owns that property there on Freemanville. And is there an opportunity to create some type of trail connection along the perimeter of the site that could be preserved at such time that the school board decides to develop? That would get us a trail connection over to Wood Road, which was identified last year as one of the 3 golden opportunities in the Milton Trail Blueprint, which would connect between Birmingham Falls, Summit Elementary, and Providence Park. There's several tasks associated with each one of the phases. We have completed most of the Phase 1 activities or tasks, which was an environmental screening of the golf course itself. We identified no environmental factors on the site except for the possibility of an endangered fish, possibly in Chicken Creek, which no one has seen in quite some time, but it is on the radar. And as we get into, let me back up. We're underway with an assessment of the existing facilities at the club, the clubhouse, the pool, and the tennis courts. We're continuing to look at that and the feasibility of long-term operation of those facilities, whether it's by a third-party operator or a lot of the other options by looking at case studies around the country. And as I mentioned, we finished public engagement. Phase 2 is focused on the trails. We're getting ready to do the first part of that is topographic survey work along the right-of-ways along the Central Milton Trail. All that will come together to develop a concept plan that will identify long and short-term strategies for the park itself, along with typical cross-sections and conditions along the trails. As we begin to look at the park itself, to look at this map, you kind of have to turn your head on the side because north is going towards the right side of your screen. That's Dinsmore along the far right-hand side of your screen under the word Active Acres. We've identified two primary areas of the site, and that is the passive preserve, which is everything in green. That was purchased with green space bond funds and is obligated to remain passive in its use. The other piece is the Active Acres. That is the existing club facilities or former club facilities, about 7 acres, which was purchased with other funds and provides much more flexibility in the long-term programming of that space. Within the passive preserve itself, there's 2 different character zones, and that's why you see 2 different colors of green. The Northwoods is the lighter green. It has more open vistas and has more proximity to the Wood Valley neighborhood, High Grove Road, and High Grove Club Drive. And then the Southwood, shown in the darker forest green to the south, less impacts on residential, much more steep slope, and much more wooded conditions. So the opportunities for different user experiences and impacts are very different. So we're considering those differently. As a project team, we established 4 project ground rules to guide our work and guide our Phase 1 public engagement. Number 1, we want at all times to honor Milton's rural character. We're obligated to do so with the purchase of the site being with the Green Space Bond Funds, and that the site will remain passive with the exception of the Active Acres. Ground rule number 2 is to build from existing plans and studies related to parks and recreation throughout the city. We're building directly from the Milton Trails blueprint last year. We're also looking at some of the recommendations that are coming from the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which is in draft form, and some of the community assessments that were put out and compiled as part of that. It informed a lot of the questions that we asked through our public outreach. We want to design safe and attractive spaces for all at the end of this process. And of course, we want to value the voices of all citizens and really have tried to stay true to that throughout the last month with our robust engagement. So as we began to look at the site as a project team, we went out and looked at the conditions. I mentioned that we have 2 different zones in the passive preserve. The Northwoods here you see with its open vistas. The city is actually maintaining this right now with intermittent mowing. And then as we move to the Southwoods on the southern end, you can begin to see that steep slope I mentioned. And you can also see the city is experimenting with what happens to a golf course when you let it go back to nature. How does nature begin to restore itself? And it is actually a rapid process. And so that is just a few months of growth from one season that you begin to see on the former fairways. At the Active Acres, the 7 acres where the former club facilities are, we have the clubhouse, the pool, the cart barn, and the surface parking lot. The initial assessments coming back from that, the pool is in good shape with some of the improvements that were made last year. The tennis courts are up and running and are beloved by the community. And looking at the initial assessments of the clubhouse itself, it's structurally sound. There are some issues with the roof. And what we found is the structure of the building is such that all of the interior walls are not structural. So there's infinite flexibility on what may be possible in reconfiguring that building if it makes sense at the end of this process to repurpose that building. We don't know that quite yet. In looking at the site, we had some initial observation as a team. There continues to be questions related to, and the process to conclude the transfer of easements related to the golf course and the cart paths, and those vary throughout the site. There is a variety of deferred maintenance on the cart paths. And what we've seen in case studies of golf course to park conversions in a lot of communities is they can simply convert those cart paths into trails. We are not as lucky here in Milton to simply do that. Out of 25,000 linear feet of trail path, about 15,000 linear feet are in ill repair. And so we kind of have to start from scratch in looking at developing a plan and even the interim plan for trails. There's a variety of deferred maintenance on drainage. You can begin to see here where this structured drainage is beginning to collapse, and even opportunities to try to shore that up are failing. Here's where drainage and cart path maintenance combine to create a public safety issue. This bridge, if you look at it, its structural pier is exposed and falling apart. Not a bridge I'd recommend you go out and cross. So this is why it's important that the public not have access to the park at this time until some of these conditions are improved. So to summarize our public engagement, for the last 35 days, we focused on reaching the public, both where they are and coming to us. We started by launching an online public input portal. We were at Crabapple Fest, 4 public sessions, meeting with the Equestrian Committee and the open house. So with the online public input portal, we launched that October 1st. We had over 1,100 participants, and that is all Milton residents. So that was not folks coming from outside. We were able to query and sort. So we had 1,100 Milton residents that participated. Just to put that into perspective, for the Fulton County Comprehensive Transportation Plan, there's about 1,800 survey participants for that, for the entire county. Dunwoody recently did a survey for the Dunwoody Village. Imagining that, they had about 1,500 participants. So I think this is a really robust engagement here with this 140 acres. At the Crabapple Fest, we talked to about 500 participants. We got them to engage in questions that were both in alignment with that in the online survey and what we asked at the online not the online, but the in-person sessions. So we're able to quantify and compare input from all of these different mechanisms. We had 4 targeted public meetings. The public was welcome to attend all of them, but we did have different stakeholder focus groups. So we targeted number 1, the adjacent residents and neighbors. Number 2, members of city committees. Number 3 is escaping me. We can go straight back. And I don't want to get it wrong. Number 2 was active groups. Those are members of the swim and tennis club. There at the former club facilities. Then we had members of the city committees. That's equestrian, open space, disability, and better together. And then we had a catch-all on October 18th for all city committees. Let me advance here. At those meetings, we provided an overview of the scope. We shared information on case studies of similar sites and park conversions. And then we had the second half of the meetings were focused on public conversation. We were in small groups of tables, and we had iterative rounds of conversation. We called this World Cafe. And through these very simple questions, we were quickly able to get at the heart of discovery of issues that were important to these various stakeholder groups. And then at the end of that, we took that input, broke it down into the top 4 or 5 issues from those target groups, and then we asked for participants then to vote on both long-term and short-term strategies that they wanted to advance. We also, as a consultant team and staff, went out and visited the site very quickly one morning. Went out there, we looked at the site so that we could bring everything that we were hearing from the public, we could put it together with the site. While we were out there, we met with one of the critical key stakeholders, Hunt Tosh. He's there with our equestrian expert, Jan Hancock. And we also went to the Fulton County School site so we could understand that connection. So what did we hear? We took all this input, we kind of put it in a bag, shook it up, and what came out the other side? Here's some of the results that came out with this is information both online and in person. So we see far and above, walkers and hikers are the number 1 interest group that participated through the engagement process, followed by cyclists, runners, some of the members of those active clubs, swim and tennis, then some other user groups. Equestrians, not surprisingly, a little lower, but it is a niche group within the community, and so their numbers are a little bit lower. In terms of, we asked within the active acres, what are the preferred programs and amenities? Swimming pool comes out highest, along with picnic areas, possibly a playground, the tennis courts, so a lot of some of the existing facilities. And then again, equestrian coming down relatively low, but not surprising. Passive preserve, that's the former fairways of the site. Number one thing folks wanted was wetland boardwalks, which is a great opportunity because much of the south property is wetland. Grasslands and wildflower meadows, I think people could envision those fairways being converted into open areas. The irrigation ponds maybe becoming fishing ponds, catch and release, and then restored woodlands. And then in terms of preferred trail types, hiking, walking, biking trails, very, very high. Equestrian, again, a little lower, but not a surprise. And then in trail surfaces, soft surface trails and boardwalk far above the preferred trail types. The more urbanized conditions of asphalt or concrete showing up much lower. And given existing conditions and without build out of the trail blueprint, access by car and vehicle was by and far how folks envisioned accessing the park. At these public meetings, we also asked for participants to identify site features and conditions, so we began to identify those in addition to what we identified as staff. We shared this at the open house a few minutes ago. So we took all that, we put that in the bag, and here is where all of this input comes down to some 7 guiding principles supported by 25 design policies. So number 1, and Sudi, I believe we have copies of this for you, of these guiding principles. Number A, and these are ranked in what we heard from the public. So number 1, promote the safety and mitigate impacts of adjacent neighbors. And so the question for us as a design team is, how do we define, screen, and protect public and private spaces? And so we have a variety of strategies, and I don't want to go through every one, but it is a combination of physical and landscape solutions to screen between public property and the backyards of homes and the park. It's moving trails as far away from residential properties to the extent possible and practical. It's limiting access from public roads that are primarily residential, such as High Grove Road and High Grove Club Drive. And it is considering operation of the passive preserve as a dawn to dusk facility. Number 2, celebrate and restore nature throughout the passive preserve. We're obligated to do this through the legal requirements of the green space bond acquisition. So how can plans build upon Milton's character while preserving both the natural features but also the design landscape? Because the golf course itself is a design landscape. The hills and other things have been created. They are not all natural, and there may be features that want to be preserved. And so there's also supporting policies here. I won't hit them all, but some of it focuses on stormwater, naturalized drainage. Some of it is restoring Chicken Creek and its stream banks. And another very important one, B6, and we heard this from the public, is limiting lighting, sound, and additional structures within the site. Keeping it natural, keeping it rural. C, retain existing programs within the active acres. The swim and tennis programs are beloved. The clubhouse, maybe not so much. So how can ongoing planning support possibly, not only the existing programs, but possibly suitable growth in that location of those programs? 4, or D, is balance multiple uses within the park. And this is complicated because we have a variety of interest groups. We have walkers, hikers, runners, bikers, and equestrians. And they're all competing for space out there, and they all have different needs. And so our challenge as designers is how do we meet the design requirements for each one of those groups to access this park safely? And so we have some policies supporting that as well. And one of the key ideas that came out is a variety of trails of various widths and distances, so possibly a series of loop trails throughout the site. E is support safe connections to existing and future parks. This is already within the scope of the project connecting to the Central Milton Trail, but we also heard through the process that we needed to explore opportunities to connect northward to Birmingham Park. Also, safety of road crossings is important and critical, and so prioritizing avoiding at-grade crossings of roads wherever possible, and we evaluated that. And so one of those, we know that the Central Milton Trail, shown in yellow, is within the scope, and obviously connecting, as I mentioned, through Fulton County School. But this northern connection to Birmingham, possibly using Nix Road, was determined through discovery through the public process. Creating some type of pedestrian connection or greenway on Dinsmore between the club and what used to be Fairway 1. And then how do we get below Freemanville at Chicken Creek? There's an existing bridge there. We've done some preliminary analysis, and it looks like from a clearance point of view, we could make that work. It would require easements through property owners, strategic property owners in that location to make that happen. F is distribute access points and parking off-site. This is important because the park only accesses public property in 4 locations, and they're all challenged. So we want to make sure that each of those access points is evaluated for public safety, habitat preservation, and impacts on adjacent neighbors. And so, we look at, if you look at the right, we have the existing 126 parking spaces at the club, but that can't accommodate everything. Vehicular access on down at what used to be Fairway 1, not good sight lines and clearance there, and all of these others get challenges. The connection that we want to explore the most is at the southern end and getting through Chicken Creek under Freemanville and over to the school property. And so finally, to do all this is going to require partnerships and coordination with adjacent landowners and organizations. These are strategic partners that could advance both planning, connections, and implementation. And I'll just talk about a couple opportunities here. There we go. And this is going back and pivoting to the southern end of the property, and that is along that property, and the property owner is critical along Chicken Creek at the far south or left-hand side of the screen. There also may be the shortest distance to connect is actually that yellow arrow to the right of that, which would require an at-grade crossing across the street. We don't know what the solutions are, but those are 2 concepts or ideas that we are exploring and will require continued conversations with strategic partners. So what are next steps? We're going to continue to develop out this concept plan. That is going to be both made up of short-term strategies. What is the minimum that needs to be done to provide relatively immediate and safe access to the park space? And then what is that long-term vision and build-out of the park? And maybe that's a 25-year vision. That will all go into a physical concept plan. That's not a design that can go out and get built, but it is a vision to go out and talk with strategic partners and funding partners to advance the project going forward. We'll also continue evaluation of the trails that I mentioned, the survey work, individual conversations with property owners along the Central Milton Trail, and including the Fulton County School staff and board. And then we'll develop typical cross sections because Wood Road, Summit Road, Red Road, they all vary in their widths and conditions. So we'll develop cross sections in various places. All that will come together with a concept plan that will also have costing and implementation and phasing recommendations. So at that is a very quick update on several months of work and engagement, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Questions?
I'd just like to have the presentation that you had. Maybe we can post it for the community so that
Terrific.
we can study it more.
And I would just say that, it would be very important to me to make sure public had access to it and lots of feedback from public and those that are affected.
All of the draft policies that were shared tonight, we handed out those policies. We're asking for folks to take that, read it. We know there's 25 supporting design policies, and we're asking the community to go and wordsmith that, make sure we got it right, because we had a short amount of time. It's our first stab, and so it will only get stronger with community input going forward.
Is that available would that be available online on the city website? Can we
Sure, we'll make sure that all the information
Okay.
is available. At this stage, we're at a very conceptual, high level, so there are some details associated with this plans that we just haven't gotten to yet, but everything that we've done up till now.
And maybe just a statement of that too.
Correct.
That way people know that it's just high level. It's nothing planned in stone, no pun intended, but that, and also open for input.
We can do that. And if you have any questions or comments as we move forward, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll include all of that in the concept report.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much.